And good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. I would like to welcome Barbara MacFerrin. I'm saying McFadden over here. I'm already tripping over my words, Barbara. But we have a wonderful presentation for us today. I always love when I see portraits like yours, anything that was inspired by the Dutch masters, old Renaissance art, people who are able to take that genre and put it into photography. It always amazes me. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, right? Your workflow and how you accomplish your portraits.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'll be talking about what inspires me, who inspires me, and just kind of how I started with this genre. And yeah, I'll have a slideshow and just talk a little bit about tips if anybody wants to get into this type of photography, just some starting tips and a little bit of editing at the end.
Perfect. So we're going to get to see some workflow, some final product of the fine art portraiture that is more of the Renaissance kind of style. Barbara, you use a lot of textures in your work. That's correct in your editing?
I do, yeah. I would say probably 95% of my work has at least one texture, if not several stacked, to give it that fine art look.
Interesting. Well, I personally am going to be interested in that because I know it's a tough thing to do. It sounds easy in theory, but once you put it into practice, it's hard to master it. So I'm going to stay tuned. If you guys do have any questions, particularly if you have a question on a portrait that you see up on the screen or a technique that Barbara is discussing, don't hesitate. We are going to be taking questions throughout if it's something that is pertinent to what Barbara is discussing. So sit back, relax, enjoy. Barbara, will have you take it away.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Barbara MacFerrin. I'm a fine art portrait photographer based in Boulder, Colorado. I also photograph headshots and branding, which probably aren't as fine art as my creative work, but I do enjoy that type of photography as well. I would say that I started photographing portraits about almost 5 years ago now. I started off photographing landscapes about, 25 years ago after my dad gifted me a camera for my 17th birthday. That's when photography, pretty much the passion started for me. I was photographing pretty much anything I could find, mostly landscapes. I live in beautiful Colorado, so landscapes were really fun to photograph, mountains and trees, and I did a few candid shots of like family and friends. So for a long time, it was just a hobby for me. And then life got in the way, and I started a career in information technology. I was a sysadmin for various companies, which is not creative at all, but it paid the bills. And then photography just kind of took a back seat. But fast forward to a few years ago, I actually quit the field altogether, went back to grad school, and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I started looking into photography again and how I could start a business. So about late 2016, I started photographing people and friends and family and started charging for my work. And then I guess the rest is history. I just started to develop my own style. I wanted to be different, and didn't want to just have like basic portraits like everybody else. I wanted to stand out and be different and be known for something unique. I started thinking about, okay, what style could I start with? And I've always been inspired by the old master paintings of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. And I loved how they used light on their subjects, and I wanted to try and emulate that in my photography. So I just want to go through and I have a little slideshow with examples of my work. And if you have any questions during the slideshow, please go ahead and ask. I have a little bit of music I'll be playing and everything, so it's going to be fun. So go ahead and turn it down. Here we go. Cool. So I'll talk a little bit here about what is fine art photography. A lot of people ask me that. You know, I feel like it's created with the photographer's vision in mind. So it's not like going out and taking a photo like in terms of like photojournalism where you're actually recording what's really in front of you. I don't know, I feel like it's just creating the vision of that photographer. So it can start with an actual photograph that I took, what's in front of me, but then I run it through a process that is more like, I don't know, a fantasy or just something more creative that happens for me. It happens organically. Some photographers will start with an exact vision from the beginning and they plan every step of the way. They plan the wardrobe and the makeup and how the image is going to look in the end. But for me, it's actually, it happens organically. So I might have an idea of, oh, you know, I want to photograph this dancer or this child. And then the process just happens as I'm working on the image. Like, what do I want this to look like in the end? So yeah, for me, it's more of a, I don't know, a process in real time rather than knowing exactly what it's going to look like in the end. So who inspires me? So as I said before, I'm inspired by the old master paintings of the Renaissance period, such as Vermeer, Rembrandt, Da Vinci, Caravaggio. There are other photographers who inspire me as well. A lot of you may know Chris Knight, Jan Gonzalez, Jemmy Wood Benedict, and I'm not sure if I said her name correctly, Nina Carlson and others. Carlo Danino is a wonderful still life photographer, and his work is they look like paintings, very beautiful. So you should look him up as well. He does amazing work. So here's just a little bit of, I guess, side by side of paintings and one of my photographs and how I try to emulate the light that they used. Back then back then it was just a window light or a candle light. So I use strobes for my work, but you can accomplish this with continuous light or natural light as well, as long as you can control that light and you maintain shadows on the subject so that it does create a three-dimensional image. So yeah, you'll see here with Vermeer's very famous girl with the pearl earring painting, you'll see where the light is hitting the face, which is, this area here. Another tip is looking at the catch lights. Where are those catch lights coming from? So I tried to create a similar image with a model, tried to create a similar lighting, and same here, the light is coming from the left. I tend to like to light from my left, model's right, but camera left, I like to have light coming from that direction. And again, we've got our shadows here on the opposite side. And the trick is to not, and it depends on the look. If you want a very dramatic image, then you'll want darker shadows and more contrast in between the light and the shadow. Or for a softer look, you can have filling in those shadows a little bit more will create a softer transition between shadow and highlight. Vigée Lebrun, she was a wonderful painter and she did a lot of self-portraits. This image here on the left is actually a self-portrait that she painted, which I can't even get a self-portrait photograph of myself. I can't imagine painting a self-portrait. Just think that's amazing. Someone had run across this painting and said, that looks like she looks like an older version of my daughter, Adela, who's right here in the center. And I thought, well, that would be fun to try and recreate that painting with my daughter. So, we played around, got a hat and a feather just to kind of simulate that image. But yeah, and I tried to see where's the light coming from. You can see this catch light on her eye. So the light was coming from the painter's left, and I tried that as well and see if I could get that catch light in a very similar location in the direction of the lighting, just trying to emulate that. And it's fun to do that. Sometimes it's harder than it looks, but it's fun to try and get those ideas flowing. And again, another image of mine, similar light setup, just a different model. And she's looking away from the camera. But again, I just love having these shadows on the face, and that just creates a lot more depth in the photo. Rembrandt, another favorite. Just a couple of images again with, in this case, I had the light coming from the other direction on this image on the right. This image here in the middle, as you can see where the catch lights are, I had a light pretty much, it was camera left, but a bit higher. And on this side of his face, I had a black flag, which is basically like a black board, and it was blocking part of that light so that we were getting kind of a slice of light on his face. This image, I had a darker, like a black board or a V flat on this side, and the light was coming from camera right. As you can see where the catch lights are, they were just above and coming down a little bit at an angle. Degas, I love his ballerina portraits. So ballerinas are one of my favorite subjects to photograph. In these images, I created a series with this ballerina and this beautiful costume that she has. And again, just wanted to create like a painted feeling to the image, very soft light, maintaining shadows, and just, I always make sure that the light is falling on the subject, especially the face, and everything else is just a little bit darker. So you can see the light gradually falling to where we can still see details, but the main focus is going to be the face. So yeah, and these were just another cool pose here I wanted to try. And this I've shot from above. And in this case, the light is a little different because I wanted it mainly just from above. So we have mostly our shadows are just coming around the edge here. It was still mostly camera left, as you can see by this arm and this part of being a little bit darker than this side.
Barbara, we had a question come in on the styling. Where do you get the outfits? Who handles the looks?
Yeah, actually, I will go into that a little bit later too, but it depends on what we're doing. So for example, the ballerina image, sorry, I'm going forward here. This one, she had this costume. So, she brought that, and she actually obtained it from, I believe, the ballet theater that she dances at. So that was really a treat to get this in. But, a lot of my images, I'll talk about that, where, it can be a simple fabric, or even Amazon, you can just get dresses, or from a costume, like a Halloween shop, or thrift stores. So yeah, I don't have anyone coming in to doing the styling. I just kind of find, if I see something really cool, I'll purchase it and then just hang on to it until I get an idea to use it. Or sometimes, depending who I'm working with, they might have cool costumes or their own clothing as well. But yeah, I'll go a little bit more into detail on that.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Angelica Kaufman, another painter. I believe this is also a self-portrait. She was amazing. She has some beautiful paintings of like women and babies. Again, just very soft light. She's, and you can look at the painting. What they're wearing is, essentially it looks like, I don't know, a piece of cloth or a very simple dress with something cinched at the waist. So, you could easily create something like that with just some loose fabric, and you don't even need to sew. I don't know how to sew. So just maybe tying it together to make it look like a dress, and in the back, you can have it clipped with safety pins or just clips, basically, because you don't see the back anyway. This right here with my daughter, this was just like a white plain little nightgown I bought off of Amazon. So it wasn't anything special, but it looks kind of vintagey with the ruffle sleeves here and the little ribbon. This model, she actually brought this dress, and again, it's just a very simple little white dress with a lot of ruffling. And I have to be careful when photographing white, because white will be the brightest part of the image. So I don't want it to compete with the face. So in post-processing, either that or, I use a smaller modifier to just, shine on the face and not the rest of the body. But if I am using a larger modifier and the clothing is really popping out with the white, then I will have to bring down the highlights in post, because I don't want it to compete with the face. So that's what I had to do with this dress here. And this is a beautiful hair piece made out of silk flowers. And there's a woman in, I believe she's in Washington, who makes these and sells them on Etsy. They're absolutely gorgeous. If anybody wants to know that, I can give you her information. But that just creates just beautiful, just more interest in the photo, adding flowers. And again, also, I'm going to talk about this. I don't use a lot of props in most of my photos. So you can see it's just a person, and no props. You don't need a whole lot of stuff going on here. So it's just very simple. Da Vinci, another favorite painter. Yeah, again, you'll see shadows, the light coming in from the left. And that's funny. I'm noticing a lot of these images, the light, whatever light they used, when the light, candlelight, it seemed to come from the painter's left. And that's how I prefer my lighting. I mean, I would say 85% of my images I light from the left. I don't know why that is. It's just visually, it feels better to me. So maybe that's why, because I'm inspired by these paintings, and so many of them, I noticed the light coming from that direction. Again, my daughter, again, simple dress I got from, I believe Trish Scully is the name of the company that makes these little dresses, and just a silk flower. And then the background, I'm going to talk about, this is an added digital background, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. This image here, again, this was just a wrapped piece of, I think this cheesecloth, actually, you can buy from Amazon. My hair and makeup artist helped me with this. She made like a braid and just wrapped it around her, and we just added some silk flowers. So again, very simple. My hair and makeup artist is a little more creative than I am when it comes to making quick clothing without sewing. But again, it's just a piece of cloth, very simple. And then the look, the sort of, I don't know, broken look it has is from adding textures. Actually, I'm sorry, this image in particular, I added a piece of tulle in front of the lens. So as I was photographing, I just hung a piece of tulle in front of the lens. So it gave it an even more soft look, and that sort of crackled canvasy look. And then I did add more textures in post-processing as well. So let's talk about the gear I use. Very simple. I use a Nikon D750, and my lenses, I primarily use, I would say an 85 millimeter is my favorite, because I feel like it's my sharpest lens. And I don't know, it just gives me the best results in terms of sharpness. And the 50 millimeter, I do like that as well. If I'm gonna get maybe a dancer and I need to pull back and get a little bit more space, then I'll use my 50. And then I have a 105 that I'll use, not a lot, but because I don't have a ton of space to pull back in the studio that I use, but if I want a nice closer portrait, the 105 is great. In terms of modifiers in lighting, I basically use, I would say 85% or 90% of my images is taken with 2 lights, and they are both the Flashpoint or also the Godox 8600s. And then I use the 2 modifiers that I go to the most are my 7-foot Westcott umbrella here, diffused, and a 60-inch octabox. And if I use one light, I can go with either one. I usually go with my 60-inch, and then I'll add like a V-flat reflector on the opposite side to get a little bit of fill light. Or again, if you want more dramatic and not filling in those shadows as much, you can just go with the one light. And it also depends on where you're shooting. So if you're in a small space and there's a lot of white walls around you, you're going to get a lot more bounce. So you have to take that into consideration in terms of the space you're shooting in and your ceiling height and how much white you have around you. Because if you do shoot in a smaller space with a lot of white walls, then you probably don't even need a second light or even a reflector, because your walls are acting as reflectors for you. This is sort of a little behind the scenes of where I typically photograph. So you'll see here is the 7-foot Westcott diffused parabolic I was just showing you, and I use that primarily as my fill light. That's going to be about, I would say, maybe 7 or 8 feet from the subject, and I typically shoot just beside it or slightly in front of it. Here's my 60-inch octabox. Again, it's usually going to be on my left side, and it's feathered, so it's not directly pointing at the subject. And the reason for that is if you feather the light, it will be a much softer light. And that's the type of lighting you need to get this fine art style, because when you're post-processing, you want to start with a very neutral image, and basically you want to have like a base of light, like where's the light coming from, and you want to have those shadows. But the point of fine art editing is I'm going to be painting in more of that highlight and shadow in post-processing. Some people say, well, why don't you just shoot that way to begin with out of the camera so you have less processing? That's just what I like to do, though, is that's my painting. I don't know how to paint. So my painting is starting with a base image with a camera. That's the tool I use. And then in Photoshop, I then paint in like the light, and then, add more interest with textures and whatnot. So that's how I do it. There's always hundreds of ways to do the same thing in Photoshop, but this is just kind of the way it works for me and the way I like to do it. Yeah, so, and some people ask me, well, how far away is the subject from the backdrop? That also depends on the space you have, and also how much do you want that backdrop to show up. So if you want the details of that backdrop to show up, you would just place the model closer to it. Also, because my light is so feathered, I'm not getting a lot of direct light onto the backdrop. So the further away my model is, the darker that backdrop is going to be. So you want to take that into consideration as well. So in this case, I place them maybe no more than a foot away, because I want to still get some of that color and detail of the backdrop, because I don't typically use a backdrop light to illuminate the backdrop. You can do that, but I don't typically do that in my portraits. Let me know if anybody has any questions about this so far. Okay, so the histogram. Also, I get asked a lot, why do I underexpose? I like to slightly underexpose my images because I feel like, again, as I was saying before, I want to get a base image but I want to fill in the highlights and shadows in Photoshop. So that allows for, I guess, more dynamic range in the image, because I can shoot a little bit underexposed, but I'm going to bring up the highlights where I want them. Some people ask me, is that HDR? Do you shoot HDR? But I don't do that with my portraits. So I'm kind of creating that look, I guess, in post-processing. So this is typically the way my histogram looks when I check an image in the back of the camera. As long as I'm not clipping my shadows, it's good. It works for me. So that way I'm retaining these details in the shadows when I bring it into Camera Raw and Photoshop. And yeah, so yeah, if you look at my histograms, I would say they're always a little bit towards the left, like this one, because I don't want to have any specular highlights or overexpose any highlights. So that's why I slightly underexpose. Okay, so this is basically where I like to be. Okay, so this example is a straight out of camera shot of a model, and you'll see the difference. It's very, it's subtle, but you'll notice that the light here is a little bit harder than the light here. And for me to edit the way I like to edit, this image is preferred, because you'll see that the transition between the shadows and the highlights is much more subtle, is much softer than this image. You'll see, if you look closely, the shadows are just a little bit harder. Kind of, I guess, like right in here, you'll see there's just a harsher light, or I'm sorry, a harsher line between highlight and shadow. Again, it's very subtle. You know, it's not to say that this is wrong by any means. It's not wrong, but I would prefer to edit this image over this one, because I'm going to get better results from the fine art edit, if that makes sense. Okay, these are just a few more examples of just straight out of camera before and after. This is straight out of camera against a gray seamless paper backdrop. Again, my light's coming from the left. And this is after I processed it with adding digital backgrounds and textures. So there really isn't a huge difference, other than, the background has changed, and now it looks a little bit, it just looks more like a painting. It feels softer, and there is texture on the image. If, I can't quite zoom in on this, but you can just see that there's, it's just visually more appealing, to me, to have the backgrounds and adding texture to an image. Color toning, there's also a little bit of that going on. You can see her dress is a slightly different tone of blue. So I like to color tone with either textures, because some textures have color, or just do my own color toning in addition to, or with the texture or without the texture, because you can take color off of the textures, and I'll show you that as well. Here's another image with before and after, just straight out of the camera, and with adding a digital backdrop and some textures and editing, of course. You can see here where the light is coming from. This is, this is a neutral, it's a flatter, it looks flatter, but I still have highlight and shadow. It's just very, very soft. So when I post-process, I am enhancing the light with dodging and burning and enhancing the shadows. So then it just adds more depth to the image. Here's that image I showed you earlier of my daughter, straight out of the camera. I believe this is against a green textured backdrop, and I added like a painting, that digital texture or digital backdrop, and then just did some color toning and dodging and burning, enhanced the highlights where I want them, And you can see she has a nice highlight on her nose, on her forehead, on this cheek right here. And I'm just enhancing those highlights and enhancing the shadows that are already there. Same, straight out of camera and with dodging and burning, and not too much, didn't change the color toning too much in this image. And a couple of textures. I think I probably layered a couple here, 2 or 3 textures. I like to layer a lot of images. I actually add 2 or more every once in a while. You know, I mean, I don't do that many, but usually it's 1 to 3 textures on average is what I use for my images. Okay, here is where I will talk about tips on if you're wanting to start doing some fine art work, you know, kind of where to start. Somebody had asked about wardrobe, so I'll talk about that here as well. So basically, keep it simple. You know, we don't need a whole lot of props. We don't need a whole bunch of makeup and a whole big production team to do this. You know, you could start with 1 light, 1 model, you know, some fabric, a simple dress, and that's it. Just, you know, master that 1 light before you move on to adding another light. I would say with this fine art look, you really don't want to have more than 3 lights. You know, at most, I would say your key light, your fill light, and if you want a background light, I don't tend to use one. So the majority of the time I'm working with 2 lights. But I would say when you're starting, just start with 1 light and really get that 1 light down and master that before you move forward. Don't worry about props. Focus on the expression. You know, again, use paintings, statues, drawings as inspiration for expressions. What kinds of expressions did most of those people have? You know, you could just try to mimic that to begin with until you get the hang of it, or you know, you'll eventually create your own style. But if you want to start somewhere, I would say looking at old paintings is a great start. Using textures in your post-processing is really great to get that painted fine art look. And then, you know, following other photographers who inspire you, whose work you like, you can always, you know, try to mimic what they've already done, just so that you can learn, and then you'll come up with your own ideas. But it's okay to draw inspiration from other photographers. And I mean, I would say a lot of photographers feel like it's an honor if other people have used their work as inspiration. Okay, so keep it simple. On the wardrobe, focusing on expression. So this girl is wearing just a simple knitted dress. I don't know where she got that from. It might be Joyfully, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but she brought that dress. She was wearing boots, but you know, in most of my portraits, they're like 3/4 shots. So shoes don't even matter. Sometimes even the bottom part doesn't matter, you know. So just focus on maybe waist up to begin with, so you don't have to worry about, you know, full body wardrobe. This dress is again from a company called Trish Scully. They have really pretty dresses. You know, I would say focus on like not busy patterns. This has some florals, which is fine, but it's pretty much 1 color. Say stay away from, you know, like plaids or really busy colors to begin with. So just stick with very neutral, solid colors to start with. And then I would say with the background, try and incorporate some of the tonality of the wardrobe with the color of the backdrop. So for example, in these 2 images, I use the same backdrop, which is it's like a green olive color from a company called Fine Art Backdrops. They make beautiful backdrops. It's a hand-painted canvas. It's the same backdrop, but it looks like a different color because they're just toned differently, and I use different textures in post-processing. But because she was wearing a greenish colored dress, and this was kind of a greenish blue, that's why I wanted to go with the green backdrop just to kind of tie it together. Again, so the focus on the fine art photo is to have that, the focus on the face and to not have too many distracting elements. So I try and tie in the wardrobe color to a similar color tone as the backdrop. And then if it doesn't match, or not match, it doesn't have to match, but if it doesn't really go, then sometimes in post-processing, I'll actually change the color of a dress or even the backdrop just so that it's a little bit more cohesive and that the color toning just, I don't know, works for what I'm trying to do. In this last image, this backdrop is from a company called DBC Backdrops, also hand painted. It was more of a beige color, and I added some texture in post-processing. And he's just wearing, this was basically just a gray, like Henley shirt, I think they're called, with the buttons here, just a gray shirt and a little, newspaper boy hat. I think you can even get those at Target or Amazon. And just a simple scarf, a men's scarf. Again, I like to keep the colors kind of muted, nothing too flashy or too bright. Let's see here. Yeah, and this is just wardrobe sourcing. Like I was saying before, Amazon, thrift stores, consignment shops, Halloween shops, even other photographers. Sometimes they'll have Facebook groups where they're selling wardrobe that they don't use anymore. Or if you have photographer friends, sometimes they're cleaning out their prop closet and they might have clothing that they can get rid of and sell to you. Fabrics, again, cheesecloth, and specialty shops on Etsy. Etsy really has a lot of nice clothing, little boutiques. They can be a little bit pricier, but I would say to start out, just look on Amazon. Maybe for the search words, I would search for vintage, Renaissance, lace. That's usually some of the keywords that I search with. Right here, this is just cheesecloth. I mean, just wrapped around. And then I made this little flower headpiece with just a barrette, some hot glue, and a piece of felt to hold it all together, and a little piece of tulle, and that's it. A couple of silk flowers from the store. And that's it. That's simple. It's just the little flower and some cheesecloth to cover the subject. So it's very simple. Okay, again, master one light before adding more. All these images were taken with one light. Okay, again, my preferred left side. You can look at the catch lights. I like them to be at the position of 11 or 1 o'clock on the eye. So make sure it's not too low, and you'll see that with the shadow of the nose. If the nose shadow crosses the lip, then your light is usually, well, it could either be too high or you don't want like side light either. So you want to have that a little bit angled so that you get that nice triangle here. Just have it angled and coming down. And what I had on the opposite side, now for this one, the shadows aren't as dramatic. I had a V flat or a white reflector on the opposite side to bounce some of that light back. Okay, I think I'll just hurry on through because I wanted to show you a little bit of adding textures in Photoshop. Again, simple props or no props. In this case, no props at all. Just a dress and a separate ruffle I purchased from a Halloween shop or costume shop. Here we just have some books, a couple of apple boxes, and a scarf here, just simple turtleneck, simple trousers and shoes. And then she plays violin, so I had her bring her violin. So that's another great prop if a child or adult plays an instrument, a simple small instrument, that can make a great prop. Practice lighting with still life if you don't have people to photograph. Same exact concept, light to the left coming from that side. Painted backdrop if you don't have a painted backdrop, Gray seamless paper works great because you can always add texture in post-processing. Same light setup, one light coming from my left. And you can use textures to add. You can buy textures online. Some places you can download for free. You can even go out and take pictures of rocks and tree bark, your own, and play with your own. Just add them to your photos and see what you can create. Okay, so this is one of the images you saw earlier. This had some initial editing done in terms of it's got some dodging and burning and just a little bit of editing for skin and whatnot. So, but there's no textures added to this image. So let's go ahead and try some things here. I'm going to grab some textures. Here we go. Let's see. So I'm going to go with, I think what I had before was like some clouds. So let's see here. I'm going to try some clouds. How about this one? So I'm just placing the image. You can drag it on top there. And, you can always play with the orientation. So, I don't know, maybe it might look more like smoke in this case instead of clouds. I'm going to try it this way. If it doesn't look good, we can always flip it. So let's see what we can get. So I'm going to cover the image. And then now with the blending mode, I would say 90% of the time I use soft light for my blending mode. You can always play around and see what looks the best. Overlay can look good as well, but I like soft light. It's not as contrasty. You can see the difference. It's a lot harsher using overlay. So I like this soft light here. I'm gonna make this a little bigger. So as you can already see, that already adds some interest to the image. If we want to take the texture off of the subject, there's a couple ways of doing it. Let's see, some people will put in a layer mask. If you're familiar with, layers and layer masks in Photoshop. And because this is a white mask, we're gonna paint off with black. And what I'm gonna do is paint this off of her. Let's see here, maybe a low flow. And you'll see what happens here. Sometimes this method works okay, but what happens is that there's a disconnect between like the color of your texture that you're using and your subject. Now in this case, it's not too bad because the color of the texture is very subtle. But I would say a better way of doing that is, there's a couple ways you could do it. I'm just gonna undo this real quick. One way of doing it is to take a mid-tone color of that texture. And if we change this back to normal, and let's say we selected a color, like a mid-tone color, let's say maybe, I don't know, right around here. We could paint that color onto our subject, and that would average out and take away, see, look at the dress there, see it's taking away that texture. That's one way you can do it. The method I prefer to use is taking a lasso tool, feathering it about 20 pixels or so, and you want to select your subject more or less. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but these little hairs down here, you don't have to worry about that too much. But just go around your subject as well as you can. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, and that's the point of having a feather on your lasso. So sorry, I hope I didn't go too fast. If anybody has any questions, let me know. But I think you should be able to watch this later too if you missed anything. Okay, So my subject is selected. I'm going to come up here to move this a little bit. Filter, blur, average. What that does is it averages out that texture mid-tone color, and now there you don't see like texture on her. So let me just zoom in so you see that. But what's nice about it is because we averaged it out, she now has the same color toning as that texture. So now it feels cohesive. It feels like it all goes together and that it should go there. The other thing that I do is I always reduce the opacity of my texture because usually you don't want to, I mean, in this case, it doesn't look too bad, but you usually just want a subtle hint of it. So you don't usually want to use your textures at 100%. I mean, it depends what you're going for, but you know, in this case, I could go maybe 30, I don't know, 40% or so, because we want a hint of that texture, but we don't want it, again, to overtake the image and to look fake if it's too strong. Let's see, if I want to add another texture on top of this to kind of tie it all in and make it look more like a painting. Oops, sorry, let me find. Let's go with, let's look at this dusky silk. And now in this one, this particular texture is from a company called Flypaper Textures, and they make amazing textures. I love them. Okay, here we go. And the cloud texture I used was one of mine that I created. So with this one, let's go ahead and try the soft light again. So now, as you can see, if we turn this off and on, it darkened our image a little bit, and it kind of gave it a little bit of a cooler feeling because it does have a blue color to it. So a couple of things we could do. Let's say we wanted this image to, you know, to not be as dark. We can always, with this being selected, you know, having the selection on the texture, you can go up to image and you can go up to adjustments and you can adjust the brightness of that texture. So we can brighten it a little bit so that it doesn't darken our image too much. You can even adjust the contrast, and you can even adjust the color. So, you know, if we didn't want that bluish tone, whoops, we could, let me move this, let me do that again, sorry. Adjustments, here we go. Okay, yeah, there we go. We could change the saturation and lower the saturation of that blue. So now we're only left with the texture and not the color. Or we could even change the color. So let's go up to hues, and we can, it's really subtle. So there you go. It looks a little bit more yellowish green. So yeah, you can totally change the look of it if you wanted to. But I don't mind it too much. I'll desaturate it a little bit. Hit OK. And then now this is your choice. Do you want to have texture on your subject and make it look like an old painting, or do we want to take that off? Typically, I take either most or some of it off of, especially the skin. So we can even do parts of the image. For example, let's say we want to take this off the skin. So let's just select skin. And with the shift key, I will select the hands here. And come up to filter, blur average. And now the texture is off of her skin, but it remains on the dress and flowers. Let's say I wanted some of that texture back on her skin. I can go back up to edit, fade average, and bring that opacity down so that some of that texture comes back, but not at 100%. So now, you know, it's only 30, there's only 30% texture on her skin. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to, again, lower the opacity of the texture overall so that it's not too strong. Let's zoom in again. So Now, after we lowered the opacity, you can barely see any on her skin, but there's just a tiny hint of it there. And if we lower the opacity, let's come back here, you can see that sort of linen kind of texture in the background. And there's some of it on her dress and flowers. You know, not too strong. We can lower it a little bit more. And so now the image is just a little bit more interesting. So there's without our textures and there's with our textures. And again, you want to keep it pretty subtle. Do I have time for a little bit more, or should we go to questions? Or
No, you could do a little bit more, Barbara.
Okay, cool. I did want to run out of time there, so
No, you're good.
Cool. Let me look at another image. There's my still life. Let's look at this image. Now we have actually, sorry, I'm going to go to one with a slightly darker background so I can show you the difference. So here's an image with a slightly darker background. Let's go to, let's see, maybe you can even, there's places online that you can even get textures and download like paintings. So some of these are like old paintings you can download. Just make sure that, you know, if you're able to do that. Creative Commons, you can go there and download images, just to make sure you're not violating any copyright. So just make sure they're coming from a source where you're allowed to use them. Now for creative work and client work, it shouldn't be a problem. If you're going to be submitting images for competition, a lot of competitions will not allow you to use downloaded digital textures, or especially if there's a recognizable element, you're not allowed to use them. So just make sure you can use them if you are, okay, if you're going to be submitting to competition or anything like that. So let's try something different. Let's try this flower painting. Let's see. Sorry, don't have a lot of space here. Here we go. Just going to make this more or less. Let's see if this will work. I'm going to lower the opacity first and take a look and see where this falls. Now, I'm looking at that large flower is going to be right where her face is. So maybe I want to move this around and change the direction. So I'm going to choose my painting with Command T. I'm going to right click and I'm going to rotate or flip it horizontally and see where this falls. Okay, may or may not work with this image, but I just kind of want to show you how to use this. So with a painting or another digital backdrop, we can either try soft light like we did before, or just leave it on normal and just lower the opacity. And then we can paint it off of our subject. Similarly as before, we can use an average color, or we can use the, you know, what I showed you before by selecting our subject. And we want to take this off of her. Filter, blur, average. Okay. So now we've got this nice flower background. Again, you know, just for the sake of showing you, I don't know if it would particularly work with this image, but I just want to show you how you can use other paintings or even other photographs to you know, combine them with your main image. Now, what I like to do is, if I'm going to use a digital backdrop like this, or a digital texture that has recognizable elements, is I like to blur it a little bit more so that there is a little bit more distance between your subject and that background. So with this texture selected, I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to choose Lens Blur. I'm just going to blur this out a little bit, and we've got the outline of our subject there, but let's blur this, just use the radius to blur it a little bit. I'm going to go to OK, and it was super subtle, but there's a little bit more blur on that image now. Also, what we could do is, if it appears to be competing in terms of brightness, we can come up here to Image, Adjustments, Brightness. We can lower the brightness of that background as well, so that, you know, it's not going to compete with our subject. When I do that though, it is going to lower the brightness on her as well, because that texture's on her and we did that blur, if you remember the blur average. So another way we could do it is we can use a separate adjustment layer, use the clipping mask to only affect that background, and then we can lower the brightness. Now it will only affect that background and not her. So that's another way of doing that. And then we can always add another texture on top of everything. Let's try this little green one here. Now this will give a green cast to our image when we use soft light. So if we don't like that, but let's say, oh, no, we really like that color or the texture, but not so much the color, again, we can come up here to image, adjustments, hue saturation. We can desaturate that green and, maybe leave a little hint of it there and lower that opacity. And we can take the texture off of her or leave it depending on what we want to do with this image. I don't know, I think it's kind of cool to leave some on. It looks more like a painting. We can, add a vignette to, create some more. We can actually, we can do that in Camera Raw. Let me see if I can, sorry about that. Or we can add a blank layer, come over here to our gradient, and then make sure we've selected black to white or black to transparent here. We have a radial gradient. We can reverse it. The opacity can be 100% or 50%, whatever you want. Go from the center out, and what that'll do is it'll create a vignette. Obviously it's too strong, but we can just lower that. And there you go, we've got an instant vignette. And if any of that came on her face, we just select our black brush and our mask right here and just make sure we brush that off, whatever parts you don't want it on. So we could kind of, oops, that might be too much. Let me lower the opacity and just do a soft, taking it off of there. Keep lowering the opacity of the brush and just softly remove any of that where you don't want it. And, again, this is my way of painting. Like I said, I'm terrible. I can't draw and I can't paint. So this is how I do it. So there we go. There's a vignette. We can also continue to reduce the opacity if we want. So now we have, a different an image that looks a little different. So anyway, so I see we're probably, are we at time? And I don't know if anybody has any questions.
The first question goes back to the ballerina photos from earlier, the overhead shot. And the question was in regards to the lighting, the position of the lighting and what modifier you used on that.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. Ballerina, let's see, I think, was it this one? Probably?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I was using the 60-inch Octabox camera left, and it was kind of low so that I got a soft light because she was on the ground. I had to position it pretty low, but it was still just slightly above her, and it was still feathered, so it wasn't exactly pointing right at her, but it was slightly in front of her. It's kind of hard to explain, but it was pretty close. I like to keep my modifiers fairly close to my subject because it creates a softer light. So even though it's a 60-inch modifier, it was probably only a foot or two away from her. I kind of have a rule of thumb. If the modifier, the diameter of the modifier, whatever that distance is, I don't position it any further away. So if it's a 36-inch modifier, I will have it at no more than 36 inches away. If not, it's usually much closer than that. So some people feel like it's counterintuitive the further away you put the light, it's going to be harder. So yeah, it was basically just low, not too far away from her, and just feathered and coming down at a slight 45-degree, but not quite. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, no, totally. We also had some questions on your dodging and burning techniques. One question has to do whether you do any dodging and burning to the hair. And then Chris is also asking, in regards to the skin, is there anything you do in addition to dodging and burning to give the skin that smooth painterly effect?
Yeah, so dodge and burn, there's so many techniques photographers use for dodging and burning. I tend to like the curves, just using a curves layer. So you're just brightening a layer with curves, and then masking it, inverting that, and then just painting in that lighter brightness wherever you want it. Same with burning, same exact thing, just a curves layer to get it darker, invert the mask, and just paint. Yeah, for skin, I mean, there's several, it depends on the person's skin. So if they have issues with like different tones of, some people have red fingers and red patches. So I tend to use a combination of hue and saturation layer to desaturate some of those reds. In Camera Raw, there's a hue under your hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. You can reduce some of the red, and that kind of gives it a little bit of a, I don't know, like a milky colored glow to it. And then using luminance can increase the orange luminance just a tiny bit. That gives a bit of a glow. So there's a ton of different things that you can use, and I don't use just one. So it is a combination of dodge and burn and using the hue saturation.
Okay, so it really depends on the image, on the model, all the factors that play into it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and each image is really custom. I don't have like a preset button that does the same to everything. It's just kind of, yeah, just a lot of factors depend on, yeah, what I use.
Now, being that that's the case, do you go into each shoot with the final output in mind? So are you going in knowing exactly what you want it to look like, or is it something where you kind of get it ballpark and sometimes you just go with the feel of the image during post-processing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I kind of went over that in the beginning. So I don't have an exact vision in mind at the beginning. I mean, I might have an idea like, oh, I want to create this, I don't know, ballet portrait. But in terms of what I'm going to do to the image, I don't know that right offhand. I just play with textures. I kind of make the decision in real time, what do I want this to look like? And yeah, so in it, I do have to explain to, for example, clients or families who want photos that, they love my work, but I can't guarantee that, I'm going to use this background or that background. It's just, they trust my workflow and my vision. If they want a cohesive set of images, then I do kind of give them a disclaimer like, okay, there might be a slight variation in tones in each image because they're all done, individually. And so I try to get them as close as possible, but again, because I don't have a button to push and make them all look the same. I can in terms of color toning, like if I color graded one image, I just copied that over to the next. But in terms of dodging and burning, there's just going to be slight variation. So I really don't have, an exact vision in mind ahead of time.
I mean, it's bespoke art. It's like when you get handmade clothing and the stitching's not going to be exactly the same on every one. And if you're going with your impulse on each individual image,
Yeah.
Each image has its own DNA, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, I may have an idea of what I'm going for, but in terms of what it'll exactly look like, that just happens organically through my post-processing.
No cookie cutters.
Right.
Let's see. Alex is asking if you floof the hair with a gust of wind. Do you use any off-camera effects, anything like that, on the live shooting to incorporate any movement or anything?
So, yeah, the image of the girl I was just editing. Let me see if I can find that again. Let's see, this one. I did use a hair fan for this, the bottom part of her hair to get some movement. Yeah, so I do like to use a hair fan. And then in post-processing, I'll use liquify to maybe poof it out a little more, give it a little more volume, or even length. I mean, you can pull it down a little bit with liquify to just give it a little bit more poof, I guess. But yeah, I use a hair fan. There's a cool one, I can't remember the brand, but it stands on a light stand. It has like a little snout and it blows like a narrow stream of air where you want it, and it works pretty well. Or if you have an assistant, they can use like a cardboard or something to fan the hair, but I don't tend to have an assistant that works with me, all the time. So.
Okay. And we had some questions regarding the idea of you underexposing. So the questions were in regards to, is there a certain level that you're going to? Is there like do you start at 2/3 of a stop underexposed as a starting point, or is it just kind of something you feel out? And in addition to that, if there's any, if you're basing it off of, how much do you use histograms in your work or anything similar to that to read?
Yeah, so I mean, I do use the histogram pretty much all the time. So, I don't have an exact number of how underexposed. I kind of I try to go with the similar light settings each time. I also, I guess I didn't mention this, I like to shoot, if it's just one subject, I like to shoot with a greater depth of field. So my aperture is usually at 2.8 or 3.2. Number one, that's the sweet spot of my lens that I like. And also it gives it a softer feel. If I have some of that hair in the back is a little bit out of focus or the background, I like that look. So with that said, my light's power is pretty low because of my, low aperture. So yeah, I mean, the histogram, if I set my lights where I more or less know where they should be, I take a look at my histogram, and again, as long as I've got my shadows aren't clipped, I mean, this can be all the way over here. As long as I don't have clipped shadows, I'm fine. I can always bring that back up in post. But yeah, I've never really measured like how many stops. I mean, I guess, I would say at least half a stop, if not more, sometimes a whole stop underexposed. So that in raw, then I basically leave it that way, maybe bring it up a tiny bit. But again, like I said, I'm bringing out the highlights where I want them in post. So that's why I need those, or the overall exposure, to be a little bit lower. Someone asked me, well, can't you have it properly exposed and bring it down? But then those highlights, once you get any specular highlights, those are hard to get rid of. So I would rather add the light in than try and take away. Again, as long as my details aren't missing, then I'm good. And I guess that image I showed you here, yeah, you can kind of see, maybe this one would be properly exposed. The image on the left, maybe it's a tiny bit underexposed, but you can see here how much softer it looks because it's underexposed and that light is so feathered. I hope that helps and makes sense.
Definitely. I mean, it seems to me it's like when you're on a workout plan or a diet, and people will say measure yourself in the mirror and not on the scale. And I think the same relates to light. A 1/3 of a stop under can make a huge difference on one image and not much of a difference on the other. So when you start to get locked into measurements, you're kind of just at the you're at the say of the camera, which has no idea what result you want to get. So I think it's best in that case to eyeball it.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done it so much I can kind of tell. And when I do teach workshops, so when I do work with a student, I mean, they have a sense of, when they're there looking at it, and you start to understand why or how it works. It's just a little hard to explain, when you're not seeing the whole process. And and photographers have said, well, this is incorrect, and it's like, well, it depends what you're doing. So I mean, for my workflow, this works for me, and I can get a much better fine art edit with an image exposed like this image on the right than an image exposed this way or even higher. It doesn't look painterly then, or I don't even know how to explain it. I don't even know if painterly is a word, but
No, I totally get it. I think you've explained it pretty good. You have in your mind, you know what you're going for. You know the look you're going for. You know the route that you have to take to get there, and it doesn't matter whatever anybody's learned along the way, or whatever this book says, or this internet site, or this workshop. You have it. You know in your head what you want, and you
right.
shoot in order to get to your avenue.
Yeah, and it's interesting, students that come in and they, we start to shoot and they look at the back of the camera like, oh my gosh, it already looks like a painting with this lighting. I'm like, yeah, that's what you want to start with. That soft, subtle light, it already looks like a painting out of camera, and that's what you want. If you have this harsh light, it just doesn't work with the editing. You could make it work, but there's way too much you have to try and fix, and then you don't get the same results.
Definitely. Now, we did have some questions about your lighting, whether it changes depending on the modifier. So are you using similar placement in regards to proximity to the model, depending on whether you're using an umbrella versus a softbox? And also, if you have ratios that you stick to in regards to the fill light and key light, or do you just kind of feel it out?
Yeah, so in terms of modifiers, as I said, my go-tos are the 60-inch Octa and the 7-foot umbrella, because the larger the source, the softer the light. However, if, for example, the image of, I'll show you here, this one in the middle one here, this was a beauty dish. I had that, I mean, it was literally almost next to her face. It was very close because I still need the light to be soft. So because of the smaller diameter that needs to come, it was like a 25 inch maybe. I needed to get that in really close. I can get the same light. You just have to move it closer if it's a smaller modifier. So in terms of the ratio between the key light and the fill light, I would say usually the fill light is about 2/3 of a stop or more. So for example, if my key light is set at 1/16, for example, or 132, 1/32 of a stop, then my fill light is usually 128th of a stop. It's pretty low, or 1/64th. So what I tend to do is when I start to get a base, I would turn off my key light and only shoot the fill light and look at the back of my camera. And if I just see a very underexposed image, that's good. That's what I want to see from the fill light. I don't want a lot of detail with the fill light. I just want to see a basic, very, very underexposed image that's filling in those shadows. And then I bring in the fill light, and the fill light is going to be exposed, I don't want to say properly exposed, because again, that's kind of subjective what properly exposed is, because I like to underexpose a little bit. So, but yeah, as long as the histogram with both lights looks like what I showed earlier, that works for me. So again, I don't have an exact ratio other than what feels right. I know that probably doesn't help, but I guess
No.
I should take notes of when I'm, of what I'm actually doing, because it's gonna, again, it'll also vary based on your aperture too. So if you shoot wide open like I do, those light settings are gonna be a lot lower.
Well, that's an answer in and of itself. I mean, it's, instead of telling someone, well, do this setting and do this setting, and there's 10 different mitigating factors that can change the outcome, they're going to change this setting, change that setting. They're not going to do anything else to the other 8 things. And then they're going to be like, well, Barbara said that this, this doesn't look like a Rembrandt. You just got to get out there and try it and move things around, and you got to mess up a few thousand times and push your light back, push it forward, change, meter the light down, meter it up, put different modifiers on.
Small adjustments. Don't try to change too many things at once, because then you won't know how to replicate it. start with small changes. And also some lights don't go down. I mean, my Flashpoint Godox lights go down to 256 of a stop, or 1/256, which is really low. And some lights don't go that low. And if your light doesn't go very low, then you would have to shoot at an aperture like f8 or f11 or something like that, which is fine. You just, if you're trying to shoot at f2.8 and your light doesn't go down that far, it probably won't work.
Definitely. I think we need to bring notebooks back. People need to start taking notes again when you
Yeah.
take pictures and jot everything down.
Right.
Now we had a question from Jim on live stream saying, besides color work, hue, and saturation, what are you using to soften the skin? So I think we went a little bit into your skin techniques before. Is there anything else you used as far as softening the skin, or?
Frequency separation is something that I'll probably use on, probably 90% of the images, unless they have like super flawless skin. So yeah, frequency separation. Again, within frequency separation, you can use color to, I guess, fix like discolorations, with one part of the face and the other. You can even dodge and burn with color. I've done that too. So within frequency separation, you can have a couple of layers, one with the multiply blend mode for burning, one with a screen blend mode for dodging, and then taking samples of color to lighten or darken, and then using an overall, Gaussian blur with your frequency separation to kind of mix it all together. When you're done, it'll kind of, I don't want to say blur, you're not really blurring the skin, but that's what you can do with frequency separation. Also, another technique I don't use very often because it can be overused. If you overuse it, it won't look very good, but you can actually use a lens blur with a layer mask, and then blur the skin. You just have to be super careful not to go overboard. So that's another technique. If they have a lot of problem skin, you can do that as well. But yeah, I usually use several. I mean, it depends on the skin. So it could be a simple dodge and burn is all you have to do, or use frequency separation, or a variation of, because there's so many things you can do with frequency separation. So.
Definitely. Frequency separation, I think we could teach a month-long workshop on that alone, and people would still be lost and confused. There's so many different ways to tweak it, and so many different ways you can mess up frequency separation. It's just one of those things. It takes a long time to master.
It does. And I'm not that, I mean, there's, I look at skin on some of the, beauty editorial. It's like, wow, how do they do that? And, I guess I don't try to get too perfect, because I like it to have a little bit of and then texture and grain. Don't be afraid of using grain. I actually add grain to a lot of my images too, and it just gives it I don't know, it feels like it's even smooth. I don't know. It seems counterintuitive, like the grain would smooth the skin, but it almost gives it I don't know, a different feel, more dimension to it. So don't be afraid to use grain, especially in this type of photography. You probably don't in like editorial or beauty, but for something like this, grain I think works well too.
Yeah, I feel like this is work that wears grain. I mean, along with the texture, it wears the grain very well. Do you print a lot of your work, or?
Yeah, it depends. Some clients want their work printed. I don't have a big space to really display a lot of work, but I have, the work I have printed, I feel like the grain just really, I don't know, it gives it kind of a filmic, more of a textured look to it. I don't know. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, your work it's beautiful digitally, but I feel like work like yours, it would completely scream to be printed like 2 foot by 3 foot.
I can't print everything because I run out of space, but yeah, I do have
I know all about that.
Yeah, it looks, when you see it printed, it is like, wow, like so much more, like just, yeah, it's really amazing to see your work printed.
Definitely. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for your insight, your beautiful imagery. I know there's some questions we didn't get to. Barbara, if you could just throw your information up on the screen again, we'll make sure that everybody can follow your work on Instagram, check your website out, BarbaraMacFerrinPhotography.com, Barbara MacFerrin on Instagram. Facebook groups / Barbara MacFerrin Fine Art, and YouTube Barbara MacFerrin Photography, along with the other links there. Barbara, again, huge thank you to you for joining us today. To all of our viewers, I thank you for your questions. Reach out to Barbara if you guys have any questions that we didn't get answered today or any information on anything Barbara talked about. But that is it for another round of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We will catch y'all next time.